Welcome back to Derry Public Radio. Reporting from the basement of the Derry Civic Center, this is Benjamin Graham with your news. This weekend, the Derry Cinemaplex will be holding a special one-night-only double feature. Saturday night, they will be screening cult classic Faces of Death, a grim look at the brutal, thoughtless end that awaits us all, followed by 2004 DreamWorks classic Shark's Tale, starring Will Smith and Jack Black. Precocious preteens coming to terms with their own mortality get a free popcorn. You're listening to Derry Public Radio.
This is Derry Public Radio. Welcome back to Derry Public Radio, a bi-weekly Stephen King book club podcast. I am one of your hosts, CM Alexander, alongside Benjamin Graham.
Hey, constant readers.
And Joshua Kahn.
Hey, everybody.
Today we are on part 3 of different seasons covering the body and also the movie about the body, Sandlot.
I feel that.
Well, yeah.
I feel that.
Oh, yeah, kind of. Oh my God.
As we've been doing with different seasons, we will be covering both the story and the movie in this episode.
Which is actually called Stand By Me.
Oh, yes, I didn't mention that part. I got so carried away with my own joke.
You loved your bit so much.
How could we not?
So today we have Josh Kahn leading us through the discussion. Josh.
Yeah, all right. So before we dive into the body, just a quick thing for those of you who have not read it or seen Stand By Me. Basically, this is a story about 4 12-year-olds who one of them finds out, hey, there's a missing kid and my brother discovered the dead body. I know exactly where it is. You guys want to go see a body? And they do. As it's these 4 kids going on this adventure to find a dead body and all of the things that entail in their epic adventure.
That's insane, right? That wasn't just me.
Okay.
Imagine you guys are 12 years old and one of your best friends comes up to you and says, "Want to go see a dead body?" Your reaction is,
"Yup."
For real?
Yeah.
CM?
I'm trying to think of what I was like when I was 12. Had I entered my goth phase yet? I don't know. It's interesting you bring that up because one of the things that I kept thinking about when I was reading the book and watching the movie was that this is a coming-of-age story. Rather than having these typical coming-of-age milestones like falling in love for the first time, kissing a girl, seeing a girl naked, I guess. I don't know, you guys are boys. This instead is about seeing a dead body. They must confront death, and that is their rites of passage into, I guess, manhood.
And it's a kid their age, which is even more important, that it's somebody they've been following the story that this kid's been missing. And so it's more attractive to them to want to see this body. And I mean, I know, at least when I was around 12, that it was all about adventures. You know, like if my friends, like, you know, we would go like walk down back roads for hours because we lived in the country. So, yeah, I imagine if we like I've come across my share of roadkill as a child.
Sure.
On these long walks.
Not quite the same, but okay.
Not exactly the same.
I was gonna say.
I can tell you for a fact that there was somebody who was like, hey, there's a dead deer. You want to go see it? And I went, yup. And I went and saw a dead deer. So, I mean, yeah, that's less than a dead body, but my frame of reference comes from my willingness for that one step. I don't imagine it would.
I was going to say the takeaway here is Joshua Kahn equates the life of a deer to the life of a human being.
I am equating the death of a deer and a 12-year-old together, not humans in general.
I also have a dead deer story.
Of course you do.
I'm just the odd man out here then. Because I don't care. I'm 12. When I was 12, I was a little wiener boy. I was...
That's a weird choice.
No, like, imagine I was the kid...
I don't want to
I was the kid dressed up as a little sailor with a giant lollipop.
Oh, my God.
And some kid comes up and, you want to see a dead body? And I'd be like, no!
And then cry for a while.
I want the custard. I don't know.
Why
I was a weird little kid is what I'm saying.
You were a small Dutch boy?
Yes.
Got it. All right, let's let's really focus back here on this story.
Anyway, yeah.
So our four friends, Teddy, Chris, Gordy, and Vern. Teddy has the distinct things about Teddy. He has his glasses. He's also got his ears are melted because his dad held his ears against a stove. And in the book, he has like a hearing aid because both of his ears are messed up, which I thought was interesting. In Stand By Me, they just did the one. And it wasn't even that messed up. Like, it looked gross. Yeah. But it didn't seem like a huge ordeal. Still messed up.
Yeah, it was just...
You wanted that gore, Josh.
I really did.
Corey Feldman with, like, a bad prosthetic. That's all.
Exactly. Then we have Chris, who is their leader. He's the one from a troubled home, a violent home life, and all of his older brothers are bullies and tough guys, so nobody expects much from him. Gordy, who is our narrator, who we're hearing the story from his perspective, who just several months ago lost his older brother in a Jeep accident. And then we have Vern, who is Vern. Everybody is so distinct in the story to me, except for Vern. I forget Vern's a part of this story sometimes until they mention him. Is that just me?
No, he was the dingus. He was the dingus of
Strong words. This has been Ben's Hot Takes. But Vern is the one who kicks it off by being like, I overheard my brother and his friend saying that they boosted a car. They drove up and they found this kid's body, Ray Brower from Chamberlain, who has been missing, and no one knew what was happening. He went
Chamberlain, guys. Anybody recognize Chamberlain?
Yes, Carrie.
Yeah.
And like interesting that they are Castle Rock and Chamberlain are just down the train tracks from each other. Mm-hmm. That's very cool. So Vern was under the porch digging for his pennies, which is
not worth going into.
So funny in the movie, though.
It really is.
Because of the unrealistically tall under the house set that they built for that.
I thought that too. I was like, wow, they really made this huge so that the camera guy could get in there.
Yeah.
And just chubby little Chris O'Donnell really nails the part of Vern Rather.
You mean Jerry O'Connell?
What did I say?
Did you just say Chris O'Donnell? So as you guys both well know, that every time there's a Castle Rock book, I freak out. I'm very excited about it because I love Castle Rock books. It was also after Vern tells the story that we get the first mention of Ace Merrill, and who I knew from Needful Things.
I completely forgot about Ace Merrill being one of the secondary antagonists of Needful Things. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until I was reading the IMDb trivia page during the movie, instead of paying attention, that I was reminded of that and a bunch of other connections. That Ace Merrill is related to Pop Merrill, who's a main character in The Sundog.
So then we find out, like I said, they found the body, that they know it was hit by a train. They presume it was hit by a train, and it's nowhere near where anybody is searching. So they decide we're going to keep our mouths shut, and we're never going to tell anybody, which is bullshit, because they do. And so Vern takes this news, and he's like, guys, they're not going for it. Do you guys want to camp out and lie to our parents and just do this thing? And everyone's like, yep, all right, cool. I love that all of them are so dysfunctional in their own families and own ways that this adventure took zero preparation.
Yeah.
The parents in this book are all horrible. All of the adult figures are awful people. And so Gordon's parents are so deeply mourning the death of his brother that even before his brother died, they didn't know Gordon was there.
Right.
And now it's even worse. And what really got me while I was reading the book was a line that Gordon says after his mother does something. She ignores him in some way. And he's not blaming her. He's excusing her. And he says, her only kid was dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's dark.
Yeah, I agree that like all of these families are so broken pretty much. And a few of them have even like had this experience of death or violence in their family Gordy with his older brother, and Chris specifically with his just like violent delinquent family and his drunk dad, abusive dad. And like you said earlier, like this is all about them confronting their mortality and experiencing death, and that it doesn't really click home, even though they all live these kind of terrible home lives, that it isn't until they see a kid their own age that it comes home. It's really interesting.
And it explains why the four of them are so close. They talk about the treehouse where they hang out, and that these are our four main characters. But he mentions that there are plenty of other kids that came around and hung out in this treehouse. But the four of them just had this connection, and I think it stems from the fact that all of their home lives are in some way, shape, or form very difficult, and they lean in on each other a lot to get through all of that at such a young age.
I feel like I got that more in the movie than in the book, at least as far as the friendship among the four of them was portrayed, because I don't know about you guys, but I had a little bit of a hard time with Teddy and Vern in the book being part of that unit the way that Chris and Gordy are. Teddy and Vern just kind of bothered me at times.
I understand where you're coming from. I disagree, though, because, well, they're obnoxious in the book. They're a dingus and like a real weirdo. But that's kind of one of the themes is jumping ahead, like Gordy's dad says, these are your friends, a delinquent and two Phoebes. But like these guys that he has chosen as his friends, they are in the long run who they are. And later on in the book, there's this sequence where they're on their walk, and Chris pulls Gordy aside and says, next year we're going to middle school and this all falls apart. We're not going to be friends anymore because, Gordy, you're going to go on to the college courses, and the three of us are going to be in the dummies classes and the remedial stuff and the trade courses, because that's just who we are. And this crushing part of the book where Chris says, I don't remember the exact context, but he says, friends are the people that drag you down. And it's so devastating that that's how he feels. And that's through no fault of their own. That's just Vern and Teddy, because they've had such hard lives, because they come from the bad side of town. It's not their fault that they're unlikable. It's just they're the kids that don't win. And it's sad, but I really... It gives a depth to their characters in the book. Also, I hated Teddy's fucking laugh in the movie. That's my other problem.
To what you were saying, there's a passage that really struck me, which is maybe why I couldn't get into those two characters as much, because, Ben, I agree with what you're saying, and they have tragic stories, and it's not their fault. But I was most struck by the relationship between Chris and Gordy. You just know that these two kids get each other and give something to one another that they aren't getting or can't get, and aren't giving or can't give to the other two. It's this thing that's shared not among the four of them as friends, but between Chris and Gordy only. I really got that in this passage that I want to share with you guys. And as you said, Ben, they're walking and Chris and Gordy fall back. And during that conversation where Chris is saying, "This is it, you have to move on," Gordy balks at that idea. And Chris is like, "Your parents don't give a shit about you. I know they don't. And if they won't, then I will." And he basically says, you can be something. You have a chance, and where anchor's dragging you down and you have to cut the rope, lose us. And what follows is a passage that I had to read it twice because it just really stuck with me. Chris Chambers was 12 when he said all that to me, but while he was saying it, his face crumbled and folded into something older, oldest, ageless. He spoke tonelessly, colorlessly, but nevertheless, what he said struck terror into my bowels. It was as if he had lived that whole life already. It's too old for a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
To have to be so self-aware of his situation and the roadblocks that are going to be placed in front of him, for him to have that knowledge at the age of 12 and to have already given up on his life, on his future, that is all ahead of him.
Chris Chambers is such a fantastic character for all of those reasons. Throughout the book, whenever one of the characters... and that's another thing I love is all these characters are written so accurately as 12-year-olds. King sometimes, especially in his later books, like has trouble writing kids, you know? He tries to add too much slang and it comes out kind of goofy. But these kids, you believe these are a group of 12-year-old boys. Chris just has this way about him of he handles the peace. He keeps the peace the best.
He reminded me a lot of Mike from Joyland, with the exception of, like, because we talked about in, you know, Mike, because he has The Shining and he like has all of these, you know, he's so wise because he has so much, he's exposed to so much coming into him, whereas like Chris is, and so Mike says things that are beyond his years. He's wise beyond his years, where Chris is that similar way, except for Chris gained all of that information by living the life he lives. Like it's a very different way of having all that knowledge, but it just the way he talks reminded me of Mike saying those things that are wise beyond his years.
The framing is the same, where we're hearing this whole story as the main character Gordy is writing about it as an adult. He is reflecting back on all of this fateful 2 days as a kid. And I wanted to ask you guys, how autobiographical do you think this story is? Because I, throughout the whole book, could not help but feel like this was just Stephen King. It's so true to life. It is so just, you could feel as though everything in this story happened. On top of the fact that adult Gordy describing his adult life just is Stephen King.
That's
describes
true.
it. He's went on and his first book became a bestseller and then had a movie made out of it and it became a big hit. And then his second book had a movie. And so he's like this horror writer that became super famous and rich from his storytelling. And he's possibly the quintessential King self-insert.
Yeah.
And so I felt like
that's interesting.
Part of it had to have been. What do you think?
I think he's drawing on what he knows. I mean, obviously, but part of that, and I suspect that all of us know this, when you are that age and you have these experiences with your friends. I mean, he even says in the last part of the book, you never have friends like you do when you were 12. Right. And especially when you go through something as crazy as what they went through, confronting death in that way, that changes each person. It makes a big impact. And I think that it does something to the friendship. You, in some cases, in some way, you can't go back to what you had before because you've all shared this experience. Nothing else.
Yeah, it's the most adventurous thing any of them have ever done. Like, they would always, I'm sure as time went on, they all remembered that. I'm sure none of them ever really forgot it.
And they each come away changed in different ways from one another.
Yeah. So they all meet up and they set up a tent. So, because they say that they're camping in Vern's backyard, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And have the brilliant idea to leave like a lantern. So that way, if Vern's parents look out, it will look like they're in the tent. And then they hit the train tracks and they take off and forget at a certain point. Well, one, we find out that Chris stole his dad's Chekhov's gun. And so they've got a gun and they're walking and they realize they don't have any supplies. There's no food. They're out of water. So they head over.
Once again, completely believable 12-year-old boys.
Totally. Like, I'm hungry. Who brought food? No one brought food because we didn't plan this. This is a thing. Everybody just went home, slapped some shit together, and then took off. And so they go to the junkyard because it's got a well. So they're going to fill their canteens. And this is when we find out they gloss over it in the movie. Like, they give it a passing mention. But they go into more detail in the book about the time that Teddy fell from the tree and Chris caught him by the hair, or else he would have fallen to his death, presumably, as they're talking about what a crazy person Teddy is. And like, Teddy will dodge cars.
Yeah, Teddy has a death wish.
Yeah. Teddy's a maniac.
Yeah.
And it's because, his weird tie to, my dad stormed the beaches of Normandy, so I have to storm literally everything.
And then almost kills Teddy. Do you guys think that Teddy's craziness, his death wish, as you say, Ben, is a way for him to feel close to his dad?
Oh, it's 100%. It's another reason I liked the character Teddy. He has to believe in something, I guess. That's kind of what I felt. Is if he let himself believe, oh, my dad is this terrible person, then it would take away something, because he's taken that bravery of being a soldier to heart. That's what he does all of this death-defying things because he wants to be that brave soldier guy. But if he admits, well, my dad was this brave soldier, but he was also a terrible person, then that would, in a section in the book, it would keep him up on long, sleepless nights.
I gotta say, man, Ben, you are giving me a lot to think about. With Vern and Teddy. Like, I was with CM kind of in the fact that they didn't seem to be so important to me in the book or stand out as much, because I like I said, I kind of interchanged them a couple times in my head because wait, which one is this? And then, but man, you're making some really good points here, man.
Now
and
I
like
gotta double down even harder. I hate those guys.
Like, I have to overcommit.
I will agree with you, Vern. He's just some dingus. I don't know. He's less important.
Dingus.
But Teddy, I found fascinating.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. I can tell you really dug into Teddy a little bit. Yeah. So we have them at the dump, and they decide to flip for who has to go get provisions because they all don't want to do it.
Right.
And they flip coins, and Gordy is the odd man out. He's got to go walk to the store.
Well, after they come up a goocher.
Which...
That's four tails, and it's bad luck.
I guess.
You guys didn't know that? I didn't know that either.
Oh, I grew up in the late 50s, so I of course knew what a goocher was.
It's just like, sometimes I feel like Stephen King just puts in something to be like, oh, this is gonna be ominous. Like, I don't need you to tell me because I'm reading a Stephen King book. Yeah. I know something's gonna happen. You don't have to foreshadow for me that this story about 12-year-olds going to find a corpse is gonna take a dark turn. I don't need that hand-holding. I'm good. So Gordy goes to get provisions, and we meet the worst store owner in the world.
I thought this was a weird scene because it didn't really advance anything.
This story wastes time several times. If we were just to barrel through the plot and if we were to hit the beats of what happens in this book, this episode would be a half an hour long because not a lot happens. But we spend like a bunch of pages on his Stud City story, like a short story.
We gotta come back to that because
absolutely
have some thoughts.
Oh my god, please. I'm sorry I mentioned it.
No, it's one of my favorite parts.
What?
I hated it.
Really? Well,
it took me out of the book, and I couldn't figure out. It was such a tonal shift.
Well, yes, okay. Yeah, I agree.
Go for it. Well,
should we go with this?
Yes. Let me finish this thought, and it'll circle back to you being able to talk about Stud City.
Okay.
So we have the Stud City excerpt. the vomit,
the pie eating contest
excerpt. We have this scene with the convenience store that I could have done without. Frankly, they didn't seem to. The notes that I made in my phone were like, "This happened," and then I put "why," because this is a short story. Like we don't need a lot of this stuff. And one of the big differences in the movie that I hated was that they made Gordy have a strong relationship with his brother.
Yeah.
In like the movie, they're like fucking best friends, and I feel like it's more important that they don't have any connection.
Yeah.
That because Gordy is such like, it's so important to him being such an outsider because he was a complete accident.
Agree. Yeah.
And the Stud City story doesn't exist without that relationship with his brother being what it is, as far as I'm concerned, at least. So, Ben, if you want to talk about Stud City.
And what point in the book does it even occur?
It's when
it's pretty early.
Chris and Gordy are on their way to meet up to go camping.
Okay.
It's very misplaced in the book, in my opinion. That's what stuck out to me about it.
Yeah, it cuts from them getting ready to go, and it is suddenly a different typeface, and it says Stud City by Gordon LeChance, whatever year it published in the future.
In like the 70s.
Yeah. And it is a short story that the main character wrote as an adult. And it's just this Sam, you're completely right, a complete tonal shift of this story about a guy who is with a girl who you get the feeling is from the good side of town, and he's from the bad side of town, and he's the cool guy.
He's a greaser.
Yeah, he's Billy slash Bobby. It's just a story about how his brother died. They were working at a racetrack, and there was an accident and it killed his brother, and how it affected him and his family, and that it was all because he was working at this racetrack because his brother was having an affair with his stepmom and was trying to get away from her. And it's just this weird tonal shift that feels like, this is why I liked it, because it does not feel like it was written by Stephen King. It feels like it was written by Gordy. Because the themes of this short story in the middle of this novella coincide with the themes of how Gordy feels about his brother, coincides with the right side of the tracks versus wrong side of the tracks relationship that he has with Chris. It feels like this character's short story. And the second reason I read it is because it ends, and then the next section is Gordy in the future going, "Yep, that was my first short story I got published. It kind of sucks." And I loved that because I was like, this short story, it's kinda pretty misogynistic.
Yep.
It's not, it has that feeling of, it's kind of like pretentiously literary and trying very hard. And I just loved that King had not only the wherewithal to write a short story as someone else, from someone else's perspective, a fake person's perspective, but then to call it out and be like, yeah, this was from an early point in his career, and it wasn't very good. I thought it was interesting. Maybe it wasn't necessary to the story overall, but I liked it.
Yeah, I would. That's a great summation. It's interesting, but not necessary.
Yeah. Why did you really hate it, Sam? I'm interested in that.
Maybe it was the way women were treated in it that bothered me, which is something I kind of have to read about a lot.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit sick of that, but it was mostly just the tone. And it felt like all of a sudden I'm reading something completely different and I don't know why. So it was those two things that bothered me about it. I really like your perspective on it because it retrospectively makes me accept it
at
more.
least get it. But
Yeah, and I got it, and I saw the connections between Gordy and his brother and the story he wrote and all of that, but I didn't need it to understand his pain and what he was going through.
That's fair.
I thought Stephen King had already done an excellent job building that.
Yeah, that's kind of the same wavelength that was on. Like I almost felt like we were rehashing. It
was filler. It seemed like
it almost seemed like a story from like a Twinner.
Yeah,
like because it's just parallel enough.
Well, if you call it a Twinner story, I'm gonna have to like it. That makes it real deep.
And CM's rating for Stud City is 5 out of 5. Okay.
Shirts.
I hated it. 5 out of 5.
Never gonna live that down.
Painfully accurate to CM as a person.
Okay, so that's our we don't have to talk about Stud City anymore.
All right, we're good with Stud City.
Where are our kids on their adventure?
We are back at the junkyard. Gordy's coming back with all of the supplies, and we've heard about Chopper, this dreaded junkyard dog, and Milo and Chopper, because Chopper has learned to
sick
balls and will castrate a child.
And it's compared to a killer Saint Bernard from the future, Cujo.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Yeah. Just random Cujo reference because it's a Castle Rock book. And apparently a Cujo reference has to be in every Castle Rock book.
Oh, absolutely.
As I'm learning now.
I dig it.
But, so Gordy shows up and all of his friends are not where he left them. And then he sees that Milo, the owner or the operator of the junkyard, catches him. And all of his friends have hopped the fence and are running away. So he hears them. He hears the dog running after him, and he makes it across the fence just in time. He's freaking the hell out, turns around, and it's this tiny-ass dog. And Teddy is a asshole to the dog.
Yeah, that's fair.
The fact that Teddy taunts the dog to the point where it says it starts
charges the fence so hard it hurts itself.
Yeah,
which then made me feel bad.
It starts
for Chopper.
bleeding because it was trying to bite through the fence. But then we have this old grown-ass man yelling at a child across a fence. They're gonna fight. John, you come over here and say that. No, you come over here and you say that. This scene can't go anywhere from here until everyone leaves. And it doesn't. And then we move on. Because that's, again, it's just a weird aside.
It's the whole story is almost feels like a series of vignettes. They're definite set pieces.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it has a standard setup of a hero's tale. The different things that the hero must overcome to, he leaves one way, he goes through all these trials, and they change him, and he comes out a different person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And some of them work really well, and others are like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think some of it is also we're setting up expectation versus reality. Because that is what we get into that a lot as they get closer to the body, that, in their heads, they've built up this dog is this monster. And so this is the first time we see that the reality does not meet their expectation, as it will continue to not do for most of this journey.
Yeah, even though this is a horror story, it seems like, and it's Stephen King, it's not a horror story.
Oh, not at all.
Except you get a glimpse of that when they are in the woods. They're sleeping overnight in the woods, and they all wake up to this screaming sound. And is it Teddy or Vern who thinks it's the ghost of the kid?
I believe it's Vern.
Yeah. Vern, and then Teddy decides he's going to go look for it.
Yeah, he's going to go fight a ghost.
So reading that passage, I got that kind of tingly up my spine, ooh, I'm reading a Stephen King book.
Something that a quote that I am so glad that they used in the movie as well as in the book. Right after that junkyard standoff, and Milo calls Teddy's dad a loon. They get away and Teddy just has a breakdown. And each one of these kids at one point or another has a complete emotional breakdown. There's balls in front of the rest of them. And so this is Teddy's. And they talk about how in Gordon in his head is I don't know how he could love his dad, which I made a note that said me either until until earlier when you ran it off all that stuff. And now it makes perfect sense. But the fact when Vern says that maybe this shouldn't be a good time. Because Teddy apologizes for ruining the good time. I think in the movie, Gordy says maybe it shouldn't be a good time. Yeah. But in the book, Vern's the one who says, maybe this shouldn't be. We are on our way to see a dead kid. Maybe this shouldn't be a fun thrill ride of an adventure. Like, there should be some weight to it. It's
like the anti-Goonies.
Right, because the body is good and the Goonies is not.
Sorry. Josh.
All right, so
fight.
Now we get to the first time in this book that I was freaking out when they have to walk across that what is that called, the trestle? Yeah, the trestle over this long expanse where they have to walk across the train tracks. And there's nowhere to go if a train were to come.
60-foot drop or something crazy like that.
Into what would be presumably shallow water is how they go about it. And it was such an intense moment to read about as they're braving, all right, we're doing this because going around takes too long. And as they go, Gordy getting that almost psychic flash and reaching down and touching the rails and feeling them vibrate. And the second he describes that, I was like, oh shit, shit's about to get real. One of these kids might die, because I'd never read or seen the movie.
Was it before or after that where he mentions that none of them, they all came out okay?
I think that's after.
Okay, because I couldn't remember.
Yeah, there is
thinking,
a point in the story where he said, Gordy in the future says, no one died in the woods. We saw the body and got home safe. But, he also mentions that everyone is dead in the present, except for him.
Which I didn't like in the movie. But we'll get to that when we get to the end.
Yeah.
Gordy yells train, and the train's coming up behind them, so they have to sprint and get out of the way. The train is almost at them, and they see Chris just mouthing jump because they can't hear anything because it's right behind them and the whistle's going. It's so intense. And they narrowly avoid being smashed by the train, just like Ray presumably did earlier.
Causing Vern in the movie to make the funniest face of all time.
Oh my God.
That's beautiful.
Jerry O'Connell's face in that whole scene is just everything good. Yeah. But what I thought was interesting is that when they make that jump, that Gordy specifically says he never saw the train, that he never looked up because he was shaking so badly that he was positive he was just gonna shit his pants. He was the way he describes the fear coursing through him is so gripping.
He did pee his pants.
He did pee his pants.
I also love that because it mirrors what the kid that they're going to see, who was hit by a train, and him laying in the ground with his hands over his eyes, refusing to look up, is him refusing to acknowledge, that kid-like sense of, no, I didn't almost just die.
Yeah.
If I look up and see that train, I will realize how close I came.
So next we have, unless either of you have anything to talk about with the Revenge of Lard-Ass Hogan, I feel like we can just trip past it.
I've never seen the movie, but I have seen that scene. I don't know how, and I feel like it's kind of iconic. Did anyone else we'd all never seen this movie, right?
That is correct.
I think I did when I was really young. The part about it that I liked in the book was the end when he finishes his story and Teddy is like, okay, then what happens? He's like, well, that's it. Mm-hmm. And Teddy's not happy with that, so Gordy makes up some crap ending and he's like, yeah, it ends there because that's the place it ends. Look what happens when I make up this ending to please you.
Right.
Yeah. I did like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was a nice detail because it's soon after this that we have the talk that we talked about earlier about, Gordy has this gift for storytelling, and there's these things he creates. So I understand why this story was in this spot, because it cuts to the published version of the story as he's presumably telling his brain one to them at the campsite.
That was the segue I wanted.
That's fair. And just to summarize, it's 3 pages about a fat kid that pukes a bunch.
Yep. It's pretty funny. It's weird.
It is pretty funny. And I loved the movie version because of the line, "A fat lady puked in her purse." That was very funny to me. Anyway, yeah, we can move on.
Yeah. So now we find out about the story about the milk money. That Chris was suspended because milk money went missing. There was not proof that he stole it, but everybody just knew he stole it, so he was suspended. And I love the way he says, where he admits it to Gordy. He's like, because Gordy asks, like, "Did you?" And he's like, "Of course I did. I'm fucking Chris. Obviously I stole it. But maybe I felt bad, and maybe I gave it back, and maybe that money never made it back to anybody, and a teacher bought a new skirt," and just like kind of leaves it because he knows that he doesn't have the power to make an accusation because of his family, because of his upbringing. Like, everybody just knows he's trouble, and that's it. That's the end of it.
I think it would have been a cop-out to have it go the other way, where he didn't actually take the money and just got accused because of who he is. And I like that that's not the route King took.
It felt so much more real.
Yeah, that he did actually take it. And then he has that moment, and then you see that his belief in the things that he and Gordy were talking about earlier are constantly reinforced by society and the adults around him.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about them, the nightmare, and like thinking the ghost might be out in the woods when they camp for that night. But this is just something I thought was interesting when they decide they're going to take watch because they don't know what could be out there. And when Gordy's on watch, he tells the story about seeing a deer. And the note that I made was like, I just put, "Stephen King, you got me." Because the entire time Gordy is telling that story, I don't give a shit. Like, I just didn't care about the story. It was, and it's because we'd been through Stud City, been through the convenience store thing. So in my brain, I'm already like, we are spending a lot of time on things that I don't care about and are not important. And then to end the thing with the deer and to bring it back to the most important things are the hardest to say because words diminish them. And I was like, God damn it! Like, you just made it so important to you, and I dismissed it just like you knew I would. You son of a bitch.
That might be my favorite segment in the book, which kind of reinforces this whole story, is this story of finding this kid out in the woods. It has so much meaning to him. It's been deeply ingrained in who he is, and he's never told anyone about it, because when the story comes right down to it, like you said, not a whole lot happens. It's some kids march into the woods and they find a body and then they leave and go home.
Yeah.
And unless you were there, unless you were feeling the feelings that Gordy and Chris were feeling, you can't feel the importance of that moment. I loved it.
The end of that quote actually says, "It's hard to make strangers care about the good things in your life." And I was like, fuck.
Amazing.
Because I didn't care about that. And I felt like I got. That's all I'm saying.
That whole segment was just so beautifully written. I loved it.
I had a very similar experience with a squirrel.
Go on.
I'm actually being sincere.
Is this like American Beauty? Like, it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen?
Yes. As you were talking about that, I was thinking about my own squirrel story, and
Great.
And how you really have to be the one experiencing that, and everything in the universe has to line up in just the exact perfect way for you to appreciate that moment in that way. But I can't share it here because words will diminish it.
So now we go to we're getting closer. They know they are only hours away, and they decide to take a break and get swarmed by leeches.
They
Which
decide to get
they
swarmed by
decide. They
leeches.
jump in this pond and get covered with leeches. And I just thought it was hilarious that Gordy gets one on his balls.
Yeah,
Then wants somebody else to grab it off.
That seems like it would be more
freaking out.
traumatic.
Chris has a very reasonable reaction of no, man.
No, man, you're on your own.
No, man.
And that
That's your balls. Not my balls, not my leech.
Oh, I know the title of the episode.
Not my
and then he
balls,
grabs
leech.
it and it bursts in his hand
Ugh.
and he's straight up just balls. Like, it's just like, that's the thing that breaks Gordy is that moment. And he's just like, nope.
This part was another part that I was like, every little vignette, I was like, okay, the characters grow in this way. The characters learn this. This part, I didn't feel like there was, I was like, I don't know what anyone learned here. But reading the trivia section, almost this exact same thing did actually happen to Stephen King as a kid.
Oh.
Leading me to my autobiographical theory that he went and saw a corpse.
Also, this is the point of the story where Gordy says that everyone is dead in the present, but they all survived this time.
Right.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I had that in my notes, and I was like, oh, that's where it was. All right. There are two very important things that are about to happen. One, they've talked about how hot and dry and terrible this summer has been, but there's a storm coming. Like, they can tell, they can hear it a little bit. It's getting dark. And then Vern sees the body, sees it on the side of the embankment. And they go down, and the body is at the bottom of an undergrowth with a single white hand just sticking out. And that seems so creepy to me. Like, it gave me goosebumps, like, looking to, because, and just anybody searching, if they were, if nobody was looking for the body, probably wouldn't see it, but because they knew it was somewhere nearby, and they saw that hand. And then as they approach it, the rain starts, which would have been way more dramatic in the movie.
Right.
But they all jump down, they take the stuff off, they turn the body over, and they stare. And there's just this moment where they're all looking at his open eyes, and it's like, at least when I was reading it, I was like, oh man, I don't know what's going to happen next. Like, where do we go from here? And then Ace and the gang show up. What a great villain, because he is a maniac. And I love a good maniac. And I love that Ace is just like, all right, well, we're here.
Yeah.
So
he just walks up and he's like, ask your mama if she believes this.
And it's like, okay, you guys can leave. We're going to get credit for the body. Or you can stay. We'll beat the shit out of you. Then we'll take credit for the body.
It's honestly very reasonable.
I know
Which
what
made
I'd
him
pick.
scarier.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, I thought this whole part was so fucking menacing.
Did you guys think it was, if we're following kind of the hero's trial, it was interesting how everything ends up, that as they're having this confrontation, and we should go over some of the really cool one-liners because I loved some of those. Vern and Teddy take off, and it's just Chris and Gordy there standing up to this group of teenage boys.
Yeah.
Hoodlums.
And they're the ones who sort of, Chris and Gordy come out, as far as the rest of their lives go, on top, whereas Vern and Teddy
That is true.
have kind of a different outcome. And is it because those two did not have that final battle, if you will?
Maybe.
It's kind of, it makes me think that maybe Chris and Gordy have the fight in them.
Right.
Because Chris knew that life was against him. He wanted to get out of Castle Rock. He wanted to make something of his life, and he knew that everything was stacked against him. And as we learn that after this all happens, Gordy helps him. He tutors him every day, fighting and getting him to the point where he eventually goes off to college and is starting to make himself. And so those two this standoff with Ace and his gang show that they have that mettle. They have that drive in them, whereas Teddy and Vern are just the guys that get beat up, the guys that their lives are kind of ahead of them, and that's it.
It's like those two are just along for the ride, and Chris and Gordy have had a life-changing experience, that what they've gone through and this body has meant something to them, which is why they try to protect it.
Right. And Chris pulls out his dad's gun and points it right at Ace, and they have this menacing standoff. And like, I'm trying to remember. I don't remember the exact line, but Chris was like, asked him if he wanted it in the knee.
Yeah, it's like, when like Ace is like, "You're not gonna shoot me. You don't have the balls to shoot me." This was after the one-liner, "Suck my fat knob, you 10-cent hoodlum," which I love.
That's great.
But like Ace is still advancing on Chris, aiming a gun at him, and he's like, "You're not gonna shoot me." And Gordy says that he saw Chris get this sighs, this weary sigh, and has this resigned look on his face, where Chris is feeling like, this is what I am. I'm the hoodlum with the gun. And he sighs and he says, "Which'll it be, Ace? Do you want it in the arm or the leg? I can't decide. You pick."
So fucking cool.
Holy shit.
It shows this vulnerability with that, Ben, as you were saying, that metal. And I just love that those two things come together, and it just enhances both of them. Without the vulnerability, it's just not the same.
Yeah, it shows there's no malice, really. It shows that he may be the kid with the gun who is going to say, "I will shoot you because that's who I believe I am."
Yeah. Resigning to your fate.
But
kind of.
It's also saying that, like, I don't want it. This isn't, well, it's not that it isn't on me.
He doesn't want to do this.
Yeah, exactly.
But he will if that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. I that part, goosebumps.
So cool.
Fantastic.
And then, so Ace backs off, and he's like, "We are going to get you for this. Like, this isn't over. You've won the battle. You're not going to win the war." They pack up and leave. And then they don't do anything with the body. They just decide they're going to double time it back home. And that's going to be that, which I don't know how I feel about that yet. I still haven't decided.
I think I like it because what they came for was fame. They wanted to discover the body.
Right.
They wanted to get their picture taken, be on the news, but they found something they weren't expecting. They came away with something far more important and deeper than fame. And they didn't need that then. So that's why they left the body, because they were leaving that notion.
They realized that this death was more than that, that this is deeper. Yeah, I completely agree with CM. I thought it also showed Chris, because Chris, once Ace and his gang drive off, Chris is saying, "We're building him, we're building a thing to carry him out of these woods. We're taking him." And he fights off the other guys and breaks down. And he wants to do the right thing so bad, but then they just realize that the kid's dead. There's nothing that they can do. It's not for them anymore.
Okay, here's my problem with that. In the movie, they do a great way of justifying that by saying, "We got back, we made an anonymous call because we knew that, that this was bigger than us." They put the blanket over the body to help kind of protect it. But in the book, he says that nobody ever found out that they were even there. They assume Ace called in some anonymous tip, which means they were never going to say anything. As far as that reads to me, they would have just left that body there and just waited for someone else to find it. Seems awful to me.
I guess I had read it probably wrong, as Ace had beat them to calling it in. Maybe that was just me being generous. Because when you say that, I feel really bad for the kid's family.
Yeah.
Who will never have closure.
That's what made me mad.
As I was reading it, I just thought, oh, the older kids, took care of that and they didn't have to do anything else.
The way I read it, it made it sound like we decided not to do something. We decided not to report it. And we never found out who said something, but we assume that it seemed too passive to be like, well, Ace got to it before we could make a call. Like it seemed just like, oh, it ended up being taken care of, so don't worry about it. Like the kid got found eventually. It just had nothing to do with us, really.
Yeah.
And I did not like that.
Pretend it was the way I said.
And then so just to wrap up the epilogues of these, Ace did get him back. Ace broke Gordy's nose, 2 of his fingers, swole his left eye shut by jumping out of the car and beating the hell out of him. Chris had his arm broken in 2 places. Vern's brother hit him with a pipe and knocked him unconscious. And the only reason he stopped beating him,
killed him.
Yeah, because he thought he killed him. And then 3 of the guys beat the shit out of Teddy and broke his glasses.
Oh, and they stopped because they realized he was trying to fight back and couldn't see them.
Yeah,
and
which
I was
is just
aw, Teddy.
crazy. And then he mentions that they just drifted apart, which is what you do with people that you're best friends from that age. A lot of people just drift apart. Vern died in an apartment fire in 1966 in Brooklyn after a night of partying.
It was in Lewiston, but he says in Brooklyn it would have been called a tenement fire.
Oh, okay. I misread that. Teddy died in a drunk driving car accident where he not only killed himself but several other people in the car.
Real quick.
Yeah.
One of this segment about Teddy, they talk about, if you take people out with you, you're a piece of shit.
Right.
And so he was drunk driving with a bunch of his friends, and almost everyone in the car died immediately. But one girl was sent to a main hospital where she was in a coma for 6 months before, quote, an angel of death pulled...
No, I thought it was an angel of mercy.
An angel of mercy, whatever.
That's how
an angel
they
of
described
mercy,
it, of mercy
pulled her cord for her. Now, we haven't gotten to this book yet, but
you guys
what
have
are
these
the
grins.
odds? What are the odds that angel of mercy's name is Annie Wilkes? Don't worry. Josh is staring blankly at us.
I'm really excited
boy, can
about...
I not wait to read Misery. I love that goddamn book.
All right.
Yeah.
Shit. All right, that's cool. We established that Chris went on to try to make something of himself, and he was working on becoming a lawyer. He went to college, and one day he walked into a Chicken Delight fast food restaurant. These 2 people who had been recently released from Shawshank got into a fight. A knife was pulled, and Chris got a knife to the neck and was killed. When you guys
read that, did you think they Shawshanked him?
God!
I expect better from you, CM.
I expect that joke to come out of
from
me.
Josh? From Josh, yes. From you, I expect better.
Sorry, listeners. It's been an awful night.
Oh, God, that's fantastic. I love it so much. I'm only mad because I didn't say it. Gordy went on to become a successful writer, wrote books that got turned into movies, married with kids. And Ace, he said when he saw him in town, looked fat and washed up and sad, which I felt was a great ending for what would be the ending /
prequel to Needful Things.
Should we go around and rate this sucker?
Definitely.
Let's do it.
Who wants to start?
I'll go ahead and start.
Yeah.
All right. So the book, man, that opening paragraph is the most perfect opening paragraph I think I've ever read. I read it. I had to set the book down. Then I had to take a picture of it and send that opening paragraph to everybody I've ever met to be like, is this not the most amazing thing you've ever seen? Having said that, the other moments that I felt were kind of padding, drug it down for me. So I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 blue chambray shirts. And I'm going to give the movie Stand By Me a 3 out of 5 because I felt like it was a great adaptation, but this is not a story that has a lot. There's not a lot to show. And I found myself, while I enjoyed it and it was true to form to the book, I could have stopped watching it at any time and would not have felt like I missed anything because I've read the book. And so I know the story. Fair. So not to say too much against it, but it was just middle of the road for me.
I will right off the bat agree completely with everything Josh said. The book was, I felt, beautifully written. Just the language is, this whole book so far, we're only 3/4 the way through, but I think just pure King at the top of his game. The writing is superb. As a pastiche, you feel like you're there in this summer with these kids. That said, it's a little too long, a little too slow. So I think that takes it down to a 4 out of 5. And the movie, honestly, the acting is fantastic.
Great acting.
For a movie where the leads are for young actors. But yeah, I found myself kind of paying more attention to the IMDb trivia than usual because I was just like, not, and it felt really short. Did anyone else think that? Because not a lot happens.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, it's over because there's no real big conflict at the end. It's just they find it and they go home. So I would also give the movie a solid 3 out of 5 blue chambray shirts. Worth watching if there's nothing else on.
CM?
What I love about the book is that you can walk away from it and days later still find deeper meaning in all of its themes. So I would give the book 5 out of 5 blue chambray shirts. The movie, I thought there were a couple of things in the book, and we didn't really hit on all of them, but a few things that just, I had these images in my head that really stuck out to me and I thought were cool. And like all these movies seem to do, they water down those really important points. I think overall they did a good job sticking to the story, but because I missed some of those deeper moments and some of the changes that they made, making a character do something that a different character did, I thought kind of cheapened that other character a little bit.
Definitely.
So I would give the movie 4 out of 5 blue chambray shirts.
Yeah.
That's it for this episode of Derry Public Radio. As always, thank you for listening. Join us next episode for part 4, covering the breathing method. For Benjamin Graham and Joshua Kahn, I'm CM Alexander, reminding you that the most important things are the hardest to say. This episode of Derry Public Radio is brought to you by Audible. Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audibletrial.com/Derry and browse their awesome selection of audio programs, download a title for free, and start listening. It's that easy. Go to audibletrial.com/Derry. Audible is convenient to use, the app is great, and there's so much to choose from. I recently listened to Annihilation, Book 1 of the Southern Reach trilogy, and it was awesome. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Derry. We hope you enjoyed part 3 of Different Seasons, The Body. Here's a fun bit of trivia for you that I found on Cracked.com. Then 13-year-old Jerry O'Connell's antics shut down production of the film for 2 days. He allegedly skipped filming to visit a local fair and went so far as to tie his babysitter to a banister. But that's not the crazy part. This wasn't a typical fair, this was more of a free-spirited affair, and the sweets he bought had a little something extra in them. He was found, hours later, in a park, sobbing and out of his mind, much like we all felt at the end of the last episode. Do you have a funny and/or adventurous story to share? Tell us on our Facebook and Instagram at Derry Public Radio or Twitter at Derry Public. You can also send questions to our email, derrypublicradio@gmail.com. And you can listen to Derry Public Radio everywhere you listen to podcasts. So please like and subscribe. It helps us out. That's all for now, listeners. Goodbye.